welcome back. I apologize for my absence. Life has been life. I'm just now coming out of a years-long haze, and I'm hoping to get back into things. And I kind of want to take it easy on this first video back, so I want to tell you the story of the worst critique I've ever had in my time as an art student. Worst as in it made my soul ache in ways I was not yet familiar with and am now deeply familiar with, and worst as in hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was just wrong. So grab your sketchbook or your tablet and draw along with me as I tell you the tale of this gut-wrenching critique. I've heard it said that a good critique makes an artist want to try harder, and a bad critique will make an artist never want to try again. This critique that I'm about to discuss falls under the latter. If you're an art student, you're probably familiar with how classroom critique usually goes. You put your most recent project up where everyone can see it, and everyone will give comments on it. Students will mention things you did well, areas you could work on, ways the art made them feel. It's usually an excellent community exercise when everyone involved is really into what they're doing and into helping others get better. The professor will also add their own 2 cents, often asking tough questions that really make you think about the decisions you made in your work, why you made them, and what you could pay more attention to. This was our 2D design class final critique, and we had no reason to believe that it wouldn't go exactly like that. All of our previous critiques in that class had followed that rubric. I hadn't been doing so well in 2D design already. It was a freshman foundational class, and it dealt more with graphic than illustrative art in breaking down shapes and values of light and dark and how you create meaning with those without really giving any object to that. My skill in drawing was where I'd built myself up until that point, but I was finding that my skill in composition was lacking. In addition, I was told quite often that my craftsmanship wasn't quite up to par with my classmates. Messy cuts, dirty edges, the like. I have never been neat in any sense. To ice that cake, I had already been dealing with a steady downturn in my mental health ever since I'd started college. There were many things going on, but amongst them, a big one was my lack of identity. I didn't know who I was outside of the fact that I liked to draw and I was decently good at it. But now I was going to school with dozens of kids for whom the exact same was true, and I didn't know what set me apart aside from what seemed to be a mountain of shortcomings. The night of the critique comes. During freshman year, I lived on the opposite side of campus from the art building, so it was a half-hour walk through a cold Michigan winter. And our class met at 9 p.m., meaning the sun had already set. The university buildings had a tendency to act like a wind tunnel. The snow and the ice, in addition to the wind, made the walk treacherous, especially if you were carrying a massive portfolio that acted like a kite, so you would get knocked over every few feet. I get there, I'm tired, I want to crawl back into bed, and I arrive at the almost empty art building with my portfolio. I sat in class with my other classmates, and we were admiring our work, discussing, doing idle talking when our professor came in. She called the class to attention, and we expected to have our same old critique session. Instead, she told us to lay all of our projects out on one of the massive tables without any indication as to whose project was whose. Each student in the class had 2 or 3 pieces, so there was a massive collection of work. And then she said, as a class, pick out the 3 best pieces here. I don't know about anybody else in class, but I know I was uncomfortable. Part of our basic curriculum in the art program is that best is a general label, and that, as the cliche goes, art is subjective, so it was quiet for a good long time before we started to pick out the ones we thought best fit the criteria of the assignment. These 3 were pulled from the table and put up on the whiteboard. Then the professor asked us to pick out the 3 worst pieces. If asking for the best made the room awkward, this made the room deadly quiet. I can't have been the only one holding their breath in horror. Worst? Are you really going to pick out a student's work and say, this is the very worst? I think most of the reason we stayed silent for so long was because we wanted to see if she was joking. But she wasn't joking. So gradually, some of the more outgoing students started to point to the works that they thought were the weakest. One of mine was pointed to. One of mine that I was so proud of. It didn't make the worst 3, but they pointed at it and it was considered pretty darn bad. Along with the 3 best, the professor put the 3 worst on the board and told us to return to our seats. She said, in no uncertain terms, that when it comes to the art viewing audience, the items on the board will be the only ones that people remember. The rest of it was forgettable. The average viewer looks at a piece of art for maybe 10 seconds if you're lucky. To stick in their mind longer is the goal. So you had to either be the best of the best or the worst of the worst. And then she just sent us home. It was the quietest exit from the building I remember there being. I was devastated by this critique. I think she intended to give us some tough love, to weed out the people who said I might as well do art and encourage the people who were really passionate about it. But I was passionate about it. It was all I knew about myself. But I felt like I would never measure up, like despite my best efforts, nothing I made would ever be worthwhile. My mental health already declining, I continued at the school for another 2 years. I managed to become a part of the highly coveted and selective art program that I'd chosen. But the pile of unique traits that made me suddenly seemed mediocre, forgettable at best, according to this professor. My attendance faltered. I did not pass my 3rd year of school. I dropped out. Only now, 4 years after dropping out, has my mental health started to consistently improve. I don't want to say this critique is solely responsible for this downturn, because it absolutely was not. But good golly, it did not help. Returning to it in these past years with the hindsight of having experienced the world more, having been in the job market, and moved through a couple of apartments with different living situations, I feel like not only was this critique cruel, I think it was cruel, but I also think it was wrong, like just factually wrong. Think about the job market. Think about the artists you know or go to school with. Each of you has different skills, different ways of seeing problems and tackling solutions. One student might have a heavy narrative eye. One student might lean heavily into small details. One might have incredible compositional skills. Depending on the artist, they bring a slightly different skill set to the table, none better than the other. The only way to measure an artist's skill is against a task that you might set them to. If you were to assign an illustrator a job dealing heavily with graphic design, creating a website or brochure, for example, they would go at it differently than someone who has skills in graphic design. And yet more different would be the website from someone who works mostly with ceramics. Even between 2 graphic designers, they will tackle the project differently. One might use color and value to imply visual hierarchy, while the other uses shape and size. Is one better or worse than the other? No, they're just different, and it will suit the tastes of their clients differently. Also, the job market isn't the only thing that matters when it comes to making art. In our heavily consumer-driven society, it is rather important as it stands, but the person who sees your art and connects with it is the one that matters, not attracting those who don't. I was having a very bad night once and announced to my friends that nothing I made would ever matter. Melodramatic, I know, I'm working on it, but one friend of mine came to me in private and told me that a sketch that I'd drawn them a while ago of their character constantly brought them such joy that they regularly looked back at it, and that it mattered so much to them. At the time they told me this, it had been years since I'd drawn that picture, but they still had it. And they still looked at it, and it still mattered. It mattered to them. So, I encourage you to grow your skill. By all means, become the best artist you can be. Take in the critiques you do receive and be mindful of the changes you might make in the future. But never let anyone demean the value of your art as good or bad. Everyone will see it differently. Everyone will evaluate it differently. It was once said, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. Find the audience that matters, even if it is just you. Thank you for joining me this evening. Keep drawing. Keep learning. I hope to see you again very soon. One student might lean heavily into Hang on. Oh. Lips, teeth, tip of the tongue, lips, teeth, tip of the tongue. I hate that I'm doing this. Okay.